QQ here again, back with Johnny D, here to finish our two-part series on the origins of GamerGate. So, I left off with a teaser about how things were about to get crazy. The reason it got crazy is the injection of identity politics. Now, imagine you lived in a nation where there existed a radical ideology that was considered normal to follow, and you are accused of corruption. The easiest dodge you can make is just to point at your accuser and label them as enemies of the ideology. Heck, look at any nation ruled by a dictatorial regime. Accuse someone of corruption and you'll find yourself labeled as an enemy of the state. The truth was hidden behind blind adherence to an ideology. Now, when people bring up the term social justice warrior, or SJW, you'll get a storm of people saying it's all about ethics and journalism, not about SJWs. Some of the anti-gamers would even label me as a toxic individual for even using the term SJW unironically. But as much as I would like to separate the ethical concerns from the discussion of SJWs, they're intertwined. What I mean when I say SJW is someone whose faithfulness to a certain twisted ideology based loosely on social justice principles allows their ideology to cloud their ability to accept truth or to see reason. That's not a problem for the most part. I mean, go too far towards any edge of the political spectrum and you'll find some very unusual ideas. The issue in this case is people who are this politically radical started to consider themselves journalists, or started to become a convenient shield for corruption. The lack of allegiance that these ideologues have to the truth and their blind devotion to ideology has created a situation where it is nearly no hope for a good games journalism industry unless certain people lose their jobs or leave these publications. Fortunately, this process has already started. Leigh Alexander, one of the writers of those Gamers Are Over articles, has already left Gamasutra to form her own publication, one that white straight males are forbidden from writing for. And I say bravo to her. If she wants to rid gaming of white straight males, she can go stand on her own soapbox and try it over there. It's sad that I have to say it, but I'm not opposed to everything that social justice movements claim to be fighting for. Heck, I'd love to be able to get gay married someday. I did not just say that. The problem starts when you begin using social justice sounding terms to engage in dog whistle politics. Oh, that group of people that I don't like? They're straight white men. Doesn't matter if they're actually black, or gay, or women, or bisexual, gender fluid, otherkin. If they disagree with me, I'll use the dog whistle of white straight man to brand them as evil. It should be obvious that it's a dog whistle by how many straight white men use the term straight white man as a pejorative. They mean those other straight white men. You know, the bad ones, not the good ones like them. And this habit of social justice warriors of dog whistling, it leads them to using people who they would consider oppressed groups like a weapon to attack their opponents, or using them as a shield to defend themselves, ultimately using them to push an authoritarian agenda. Well, it turns out that people don't like being used like that against their consent. A sister hashtag to GamerGate called NotYourShield was created on September 3rd. It serves two purposes. It was used in order to give a voice to women and minority gamers who are getting tired of their gender, race, and sexual orientation being used as an excuse for people to push an agenda in gaming, or being used to hide corruption. The other purpose is a bit more nuanced. Journalists stereotype a chunk of the gaming community as being 1950s-style misogynists who think that women should know their place in the world. It's an ugly stereotype, and it's being used by corrupt journalists as a way to deflect criticism. If you're tired of being stereotyped in this way, then NotYourShield is a way to reclaim your individualism. What these supposed social justice warriors did in response to NotYourShield was fascinating, because it demonstrated to me at least that they were more interested in dog whistling and in-group identification than they were in actually caring about social justice. Let me teach you one of the tenets of modern intersectionality. If a member of an oppressed group or an intersection of oppressed groups tells you about their experiences with oppression, if you are not a member of that group or intersection, you should accept that their experiences might not be the same as yours, and you should not try to speak for them. This is the core tenet from where terms like mansplaining, listen and believe, and check your privilege come from, only for them to be horribly misused to dismiss all criticisms of a woman's opinion on anything. But really, if you think about this core tenet, it's not that terrible. It's probably true that the experiences of a group that you do not belong to are different from yours. It just gets used in all these bizarre ways. Now, the reaction to NotYourShield is a great example of how much of a hypocrite these social justice warriors are. because this large group of individuals, including women and minorities, had the gall to stand up and say, no, you do not speak for me, game journalists and SJWs. You do not get to use stereotypes as a shield. And the response? Well, declare them to be sock puppets. If they don't fit the stereotype, then just pretend they're fake and that they don't exist. And when photographs are produced to prove their identity, well then erase their experiences by saying that they're actually Uncle Toms or gender and race traitors. Tell them that they've internalized their hatred. Calling them sock puppets was a nasty tactic. It forced NotYourShield members to reveal more personal information about themselves as proof of their identity. This opened them up to more doxing and harassment from the anti-gamers. This is why Tim Schafer's whole sock puppet routine was decried as erasing the experiences of women and minorities. SJWs also twist language at their own convenience. Watch the reaction when this video is released. If it becomes popular, I will be branded as a misogynist, purely on the contents of this video alone. Use your brain. Does anything in this video constitute hatred of women? That's the definition of misogynist, after all, right? Think for yourself about why people would make this kind of claim and what they seek to gain from that kind of labeling. So how is it that this warped, twisted ideology seems almost universal among modern gaming publications? How the heck do they all agree to take the same stance on everything, to censor the same topics and publish an identical slant on others? Well, that is where gay heartthrob, conservative journalist, writer for Breitbart, and life support system for the most awesome hairdo, Milo Yiannopoulos, comes in. Milo never really liked gamers much before, but either through opportunism or through a true recognition that what was happening in the gaming press was just not right, he began to investigate. And what he found will shock you. On the 17th of September, Milo published an article revealing that the games journalists from all the major publications were working together on a secret mailing list known as GameJournoPros. They were colluding in secret. Now, the GameJournoPros members will all tell you that it was pretty innocuous, that it was just a support group for journalists in the same industry. And you can trust them, because game journalists are never corrupt, are always bastions of the truth, and don't benefit by downplaying the existence of their own wrongdoing. But really, if you look at the things that were leaked from GameJournoPros, it's pretty bad stuff. Journalists joking about sleeping with PR people, and yes, there were PR people on this list too. The journalists were banding together to purchase the developer of Depression Quest a gift, which was an idea that was thankfully shot down. They were also colluding to censor discussion of the GamerGate scandal. They tried to pressure Greg Tito, the editor-in-chief of The Escapist at that time, into censoring the Escapist forums, but Tito stood up to them. He was just about the only one, though. Now we know why every other forum on the internet was censoring information about corruption in games journalism. Secret collusion. Ben Kuchera of Polygon was especially zealous about pressuring other journalisters into taking down information about the Depression Quest developer. This is a big deal. This is a big no-no for journalists. They should know better than to collude between competing publications. This type of collusion prevents multiple journalists from having different and unique perspectives on the same issue, which is something that aids in illuminating the truth. In 2010, a similar list called the Journo List was revealed among left-leaning news publications to collude in secret, and it was used to control the message about things like the presidential election, and it was a huge controversy when it was revealed. The only reason this was not an equally huge controversy is because the only people who care about games journalism at mainstream publications are all politically aligned with the GameJournoPros members. All except right-leaning Milo, of course. He was politically distanced enough to call these people out on their bullshit. So now we have lines drawn in the debate. On one side we have corrupt journalists and some very extreme gender ideologues who like to call themselves feminists. On the other side we have, well, every other type of person, really, including a different type of feminist with different opinions. But since Milo is on our side, suddenly the entirety of the consumer revolt, all the people wanting to discuss the game journalism scandals, were branded as right-wing. And this pattern repeated itself. A right-winger comes on board in support of the revolt is right-wing. A men's rights advocate like Roosh V comes on board and creates a site about gaming, and suddenly we're all radical men's rights advocates. The practice of guilt by association is rampant among these anti-gamers. And like flies to shit, anytime battle lines like this are drawn, you have people looking to martyr themselves on one side or the other for fun or profit. And that environment is basically a breeding ground for trolls and opportunists who thrive off of drama. Just about every opportunist on the anti-gamer side acts the same. They show up, they dog whistle like crazy about groups and individuals that they hate, usually white people, men, straight people, or cis people. They engage in blatant and intentional othering, to co-opt a phrase. They go around just being mean to gamers or making fun of everyone. And when they get abuse back, which is usually proportionate to how famous they are, like all online abuse, then they cry harassment and publish it as an example of how toxic GamerGate is, or how toxic gaming is. This is even if there's no evidence that it's associated with the consumer revolt. If they don't get any conventional harassment, then they'll just redefine what constitutes harassment. For example, what's one thing that a bunch of people trying to expose corruption do? They go around asking a bunch of questions. So now asking a bunch of polite questions of someone is harassment somehow. A form of harassment called sealioning. It was named after this dumb comic, which I'm not even going to leave on screen for long enough for you to read. It's that stupid. They're even trying to codify sealioning into Twitter's rules. Some of the things that they consider harassment is much milder than what SJWs engage in when universities are hosting a speaker that they don't like.
You should be fucking ashamed of yourself. You're fucking scum. You are fucking scum. Fucking rape apologist, incest supporting, woman hating, fucking scum.
Is there someone else I can wait to follow me?
A great example of two people who should not be involved but are is the two people who get dragged in front of the media every time the consumer revolt over the GamerGate scandal is mentioned. Brianna Wu and Jonathan McIntosh. Jonathan McIntosh is the most interesting of the two. Basically, he's the man behind the curtains of the charity called Feminist Frequency. He writes and produces videos where a woman named Anita Sarkeesian combines basic feminist concepts with a poor understanding of video games. And he has managed to carefully control the media message so that any criticism of the duo's videos is viewed as an insult to feminism, and therefore a jab at all groups that intersectional feminism claims to defend. I always find it humorous that as much as the Feminist Frequency official Twitter account likes to rail against straight white men, Jonathan McIntosh is a straight white man. So the main thing that McIntosh does that angers gamers is he accuses games of being pernicious. Basically, he takes a flawed application of cultivation theory and applies it to games in order to try and convince people that games have a bad influence on society. Sound familiar? Now, to be fair, Feminist Frequency's claims are a bit different from good old Jack Thompson's. Jack Thompson outright said that games cause kids to be violent. McIntosh simply thinks that they reinforce sexist ideas that already exist within society. Jack Thompson wanted laws passed to make games inaccessible to children. McIntosh wants to change the contents of games so that they're less misogynistic, whatever that means. He's taking cultivation theory about how television affects people, and he's applying it improperly to games. You can't just do that. Games are not TV, cultivation theory doesn't work that way, and the way to reduce TV's effects on your perceptions of reality is to consume more moderate amounts, not to censor or alter the contents of the broadcast. Anyway, Anita and McIntosh should not be involved in the GamerGate discussion. They're not journalists. At most, Feminist Frequency's calls for censorship are the only thing that should put them even remotely at odds with GamerGate. So how did McIntosh inject himself? Through Anita, of course. She decided to go public with some of the nasty tweets she'd received, publishing them on her Twitter on the 27th of August, the same day that the GamerGate hashtag went live on Twitter. They were the vile stuff that public figures get sent now and again, threatening her and her family with violence and death in bizarre, twisted ways. Anita has admitted that she gets threats all the time, making her choice to publish them at a time when there was a threat narrative about how misogynist gamers are an interesting choice, especially considering that the police usually tell you not to go public with death threats. And sure enough, The Verge wasted no time. They wrote an article right away linking the threats to the budding seeds of consumer discontent. The Verge. Owned by Vox. Vox also owns Polygon. I wonder why they'd want to push this threat narrative. To make matters worse, Anita decided to cancel a talk after receiving death threats in mid-October. It was a pretty nasty one, threatened to shoot up Utah State University, the school she was going to be talking at. And she attributed the threats to GamerGate. The police said that the threats were not credible, that there was no risk to students whatsoever, but she decided to cancel the talk anyway because Utah is a concealed carry state. Of course, this was also used to reinforce the threat narrative about how misogynistic gamers are. I think bringing up Jack Thompson again is a good contrast here. He received death threats too. The gaming media of the time defended gamers and never generalized these threats to use them against the gaming community as a whole. So what was different this time? So there is new news about this Utah State death threat that just came out recently. Apparently there were 2 signatures on the email. It was signed GamerGate, and it was signed Mr. Repzion. Mr. Repzion is a prominent atheist YouTuber who has had run-ins with gender ideologues before. He has even made videos about Anita, analyzing and dismantling her videos. However, he does not participate in the GamerGate revolt, and I can assure you he is not the type to make a death threat. The FBI doesn't seem to think so either. When they visited his house to question him about it, they didn't confiscate any of his computer hardware. It seems pretty clear that they were just tying up a loose end and confirming what they already knew. So clearly, someone who did not like Mr. Repzion was trying to harm him or his reputation by putting his name on there. I mean, nobody's stupid enough to sign a death threat. Now, I can't prove it, but I think it's pretty obvious that whoever tagged the threatening email with Gamergate was also trying to harm the revolt or its reputation. Well, they succeeded. Anita gets interviews with the media now about how violent and sexist gamers are, and about how evil Gamergate is. Another example of someone injecting themselves into the debate, a bit more blatant this time, is Brianna Wu. She should also have nothing to do with the Gamergate scandal, and thankfully her relevance has been reduced to near zero recently. I'm only bringing her up because if you read or watch mainstream coverage of Gamergate, she'll be in it. We've contacted the ombudsman of press outlets over this terribly biased coverage that Gamergate has received, and they've outright confessed that they only find the harassment of women aspect of the story to be compelling enough to report on. So Wu injected herself into the debate in September too, by making a strawman fake gamer account on Twitter and pretending to be a stereotypical sexist dude bro gamer. Then she made an image macro about Gamergate and unfortunately used a stock image that was also used by an autism charity, which offended some people. Then she did the song and dance that I described before. She went around being mean to people and made fun of everyone until she got enough replies to pick out the harassing ones as evidence. She attributed all this to Gamergate, of course, and then she went on a media tour about how misogynist and intolerant the gaming industry, the gaming community, gamers, and especially Gamergate are. The issue with Wu is that she has a very interesting relationship with truth and with reality. She's written a few articles and has been consulted on others, and some of the stuff that comes out of her mouth is just wacky. She's even called on the Obama administration to arrest Frederick Brennan, the owner of 8chan, for things that he didn't do and things that aren't illegal. The real reason she called for that is because Frederick Brennan allows open discussion of the Gamergate controversy on his site. Yeah, that's right, Obama. Send your Secret Service agents after him. Careful, I heard he's dangerous. These people don't matter, and shouldn't matter to the consumer revolt. There's been more people who follow this pattern too. Just ignore them. They can smear us as much as they want. It hasn't actually hurt the revolt. And the more they go about vocally spouting nonsense about gamers or the gaming community, the more people will realize that they have no concept of truth or reality. Have these people been harassed? I don't doubt that they have, although some of them have some pretty nebulous definitions of harassment. I really don't see much to attribute that harassment to people who want to discuss the Gamergate controversy. Anyone can use a hashtag, but that doesn't mean that they want to participate in a consumer revolt or discuss real issues. Sadly, being harassed is part of being popular on the internet, and people who want to discuss the Gamergate scandals have been doxxed and harassed just as much. There's lengthy documented proof of it. The media just decided to only publish information on the harassment that 2 or 3 women were getting, and all of them were opposed to Gamergate. These vocal anti-gamer people have created an image problem for the consumer revolt. There are now 2 perceptions of Gamergate, one of which I would describe as the mainstream one, and one that I would describe as the accurate one. The accurate one is that a bunch of gamers has found a way to organize together and to fight journalistic corruption, censorship, and ideological extremism. The other perception is that it's a sinister group consisting entirely of misogynists who hate women and want to drive them out of the gaming industry. This is the one that the media ran with. Heck, even Law & Order SVU made an episode based on these themes.
Go home, gamer girl.
The side that believes that gaming is misogynistic claims to be fighting for diversity, but they believe that diversity of opinion is a bad thing. Naturally, I think the media narrative is bullshit. My most played game on Steam was made by a diverse studio with women in high-up positions. there's plenty of women in the gaming industry and plenty of women who engage in gaming. True, it's not even yet, but it's getting better, and we may never see a 50-50 split in the core market due to differences in how men and women in our society wish to spend their leisure time. I know that feminists would consider that to be blasphemy, but it's hard to deny even if you accept that gender is a social construct. In our current society, women generally play different types of games than what men play. The reason that these positive changes can't be seen by the warrior types is all down to that SJW ideology again. Their words say, straight white male bad, but their actions say, a straight white male who agrees with me is okay. And a gay, transgender, black woman who disagrees with me is a race traitor with internalized hatred. They want diversity, but only if it is the right kind of people. So I think that sums up most of what you need to know about the very early days of GamerGate. The videos I make after this will cover wider topics than just the origins. Feel free to give me a helping hand, and let me know in the comments if there's anything you'd like to see covered. So what else can you do to help out? If you want to participate in the revolt and fight against corruption and censorship, take up the hashtag on Twitter, or check out Kotaku in action on Reddit, or one of the boards on 8chan. A warning, 8chan is an anonymous image board and comes across as misanthropic to anyone unfamiliar with chan culture. If you hear all this and still can't find it within yourself to give a fuck, well, that's fine from the perspective of the people within the revolt. Being neutral is okay, and we won't judge you for it as long as you don't lose sight of the ideals of truth and free speech. Just try not to talk to the anti-gamers or anti-gamergaters too much. They treat being neutral like you're turning a blind eye to the worst thing to ever happen in human history. If you've watched this and you just want GamerGate to end already, well then I would suggest reading the article written by David Auerbach in Slate, where he outlines a plan on how to end the consumer revolt. It was written all the way back in October of last year. While the article comes across as critical of the revolt, he understands it better than just about anyone else in the left-leaning press, and his plans for how to end it is something that most people who are part of the revolt would see as good first steps towards resolving the ethical concerns. He also outlines why the anti-gamer strategy so far just isn't working. I'll put the link in the description. If you're already in the revolt, well, here's a little reminder. Things get rough sometimes, and there's no shame in admitting to yourself if you get burned out. Sometimes there's a big gap between happenings, and things seem to be slowing down. Just don't worry about it. Take a break. Play some video games. We'll all still be here when you get back, and we'll all still be winning.